Hi, I'm Umbrian Libris. I've spoken in the past about how I understand why Game Freak and the Pokemon Company would want to keep the battle system fairly consistent from one game or one generation to the next. Mostly, I think it's for the health of the competitive scene, since any major shifts there would pull the rug out from under the feet of established players. But what if that wasn't a problem and Pokemon wanted to really shake things up and completely change the type system? And what if they came to me for ideas? I know this is a perfectly realistic scenario. What would I propose? First, let's go over what I think are the strengths and weaknesses of the current type system. On the positive side, I think we have a good number of types. 18 types is not too many for you to keep track of, and you can usually think of the weaknesses and resistances in your head. But it still offers a lot of variety, and with up to 2 types per Pokemon, we have over 170 possible type combinations. And a lot of the relationships between types are also really obvious, like fire being weak to water and grass being weak to ice, which helps when new players are just learning the ropes. But there's also a lot of inconsistency across types. There's types that describe what kind of creature they are, like bug, dragon, or fairy. There's types that describe what kind of material they have on their body, like rock, steel, or even ice sometimes. There's types that describe their strategy, like dark for underhanded tactics or flying for aerial attacks. And of course, there's types that describe what kind of energy they use, like fire and electric. The types are also not very well balanced. I mean, most of them are, but you do have some outliers, like grass being a pretty weak type because so many other types resist grass moves, or steel being the strongest type because it resists more than half of the other types. I mean this considering exclusively the type chart. If you look at the Pokemon themselves and the moves and the meta, then different things come up there. And the other problem that I have is that primary and secondary types make no difference. So a flying dragon Pokemon is no different from a dragon flying in terms of its stab, its weaknesses, and its resistances. So since the Pokemon Company have placed so much faith in me, thank you, I have come up with a type system that solves most of that with some bonus benefits, although it does also have some drawbacks. I'm proposing a system where Pokemon can have up to 3 types, but they have decreasing levels of effectiveness in calculating both stab and weakness and resistance. So a primary type multiplies by 2, or divides by 2 in the case of a resistance, a secondary type multiplies by 1.5, and a tertiary type multiplies by 1 1/3. That way, even if all of your weaknesses align, and actually only if all of your weaknesses align, you take 4 times the damage, which is the same maximum that we have with the current system. But the hierarchy of types also makes a difference. So even if 2 Pokemon have the same types, if those types are ranked differently, their weaknesses and resistances, or at least the damage calculation for them, will also be different. I'm also proposing an increase to the number of types to 27, which I know it is a lot, it's 50% more than before. But it also allows us to make types much more specific and not have something like the flying type, which encompasses like birdness in moves like peck and just all of the regional birds, as well as the air element in the form of moves like Gust and Pokemon like Tornadus, Pokemon that just happen to fly like Charizard, and even aerial attacks that have nothing to do with flying or air like Acrobatics. So let me take you through the types that I'm proposing. They fall into 3 categories of 9 types each, although 2 of those categories don't really have any practical difference. The first category is body types, which describes what a Pokemon is. They are Arthropod, which includes all of the bugs as well as crustacean Pokemon, Beast, which includes all of the mammalian Pokemon, Bird, whether they fly or not, Fairy, Fish, which unfortunately for the sake of simplicity would probably also include Pokemon that are not strictly based on fish, Formless, which would include the ghosts, the mollusks, and other blobby-like Pokemon, Mineral, for the Pokemon that are made of rock, steel, and ice, Plant, for all of the plant-like Pokemon, but also, unfortunately, the mushrooms, and Reptile, which includes the dragons, and again, may also include Pokemon that are not strictly based on reptiles. The body types are the special category because in this system, they also double as egg groups. Another flaw of the existing system of Pokemon is that egg groups are not made explicit or even directly named in any main series game. This isn't strictly related to types, but many egg groups are roughly equivalent to types, like the dragon, grass, and bug egg groups, for example. So in my system, egg groups become explicit. You can tell just by looking at a Pokemon's types whether they are a compatible breeding pair or not. And so, because of that, every Pokemon would have at least one body type. Even legendary Pokemon. I think not being able to breed would be a separate marker. The one exception I would make is for Ditto. It could be formless type, but I just like the idea of Ditto being the true neutral, the one Pokemon with no type at all. The second category of types is elements, which describes the kinds of magic that they use. The element types are Air, which is the elemental side of the flying type, Arcana, which is basically dragon type magic, Earth, which is basically ground type, Fire, Ice, Light, which encompasses both fairy type magic and other moves that use light, Lightning, just another name for electric type, Shadow for the ghost magic and some other nocturnal Pokemon, and Water. And the third and final category of types is styles. These types describe the skills and tactics that Pokemon use to battle. Like I said before, there's no practical difference between the style types and the elemental types. But the style types are Aerial for moves that come from the sky, Aquatic for moves like Waterfall that use or require an aquatic environment, Armor, which is basically just the equivalent of Steel, Cheat, which is more explicit about the underhanded tactics that dark types are known for, Cosmic for Pokemon that do space shenanigans, Martial, which is basically just fighting type, but Martial is a better name because all Pokemon fight anyway, Poison, Psychic, and Vitality, which is for moves that absorb or that manage health. Okay, I know that was a lot to process, so I sort of randomly generated 10 Pokemon that I will tell you what their types would be to serve as a more practical example. Beedrill would be poison, since that's the main way that it battles, Arthropod, because it's an insect, and Aerial, because it does fly and attack from above. Espeon would be psychic and beast, pretty straightforward. Claydol would be cosmic, because it has connections to space, as well as earth and mineral, both of them because it's made of clay. Toxicroak would be poison and martial, basically its official types, but also reptile as its body type because unfortunately I wasn't able to fit a separate body type for amphibians. Rampardos would be reptile and mineral, pretty straightforward. Vanillux would be ice and mineral because it not only uses ice type magic, but it is also made of ice, which counts as a mineral. Talonflame is aerial because its main mode of attack is from above, and also fire and bird, those two should be obvious. Mudsdale is earth and beast because the horses fall into the beast type. Drampa would be arcana and reptile since it's a dragon, but also beast type, just to sort of serve as its normal type. And finally, Barraskewda would be fish and aquatic, but not water type, because Barraskewda isn't really about using water as an elemental thing. I created a complete type chart for all 27 types, and I won't go into the details of every single matchup, but if you are interested, there is a link in the description to the spreadsheet so you can see for yourself. The matchups should be pretty self-explanatory, and most of them are the same as the official matchups, with a few notable exceptions though, like Cheat, which is the equivalent of Dark type, being weak to Psychic rather than immune to it, because it's kind of hard to cheat when the opponent can read your mind. At least on paper, none of the types are exceptionally good or bad. There's the plant type that has the most weaknesses with 7, but it also has 9 resistances. The armor type has, not surprisingly, the most resistances with 10, but offensively it is also resisted by 9 types. So overall, the strengths and weaknesses are pretty balanced across all types. And I didn't include immunities because I don't like them, but they also don't really make sense in a tiered type system. Say you have a Pokemon where the primary and secondary types share a common weakness, like lightning and poison both being weak to earth. But then the tertiary type is immune to it, like if air was immune to earth. Would it make sense to completely cancel out the effect of an attack when it's such a minor type, a tertiary type that has the immunity? No. It can provide some resistance and cancel out a little bit of that weakness, but not completely eliminate it. I haven't thought too deeply about moves, But I do think it would be cool if the moves could also have primary and secondary types, so something like Fire Punch could be Fire and Martial, or Steel Wing could be Armor and Bird. And I know that feels really complex. 27 types that can be primary, secondary, tertiary, all with different effects, and if moves can also have primary and secondary types, it is a lot, I know. But I think that wouldn't be a bad thing. You'd have to be a lot more instinctive about which moves may or may not be effective on any given Pokemon, and it would be much harder to do damage calculations in your head, but that would also help to increase the difficulty of Pokemon games. Of course, the game design would have to account for that, especially in the early game, and introduce players to the type matchups little by little, but I think it could be done. Well, that was a lot of work. It was meant to be just a bit of a fun project, but the complexity of it really threw me. I was just really struggling to actually have my type system accomplish the things that I wanted it to. But I had fun. I hope that you did too, and you can let me know by leaving a comment, a like, and maybe even subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching, and thank you also to my patrons, especially luxury patron Ethan Saffron. I'm Umbreon Libris. I'll see you in the next chapter. First, let's go over what I think are the weaknesses and strengths, weaknesses and resistances